From Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcome to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.
Welcome to Theater Begins Here, a podcast for our Playwright Center members. I am Hannah Joyce, Director of Membership Programs, and this is
Alayna, Jacqueline, Membership Programs Manager, and we are the membership team that supports our 2,400 plus playwright members around the world.
Today we have special guest Alexis Williams with us to talk about playwriting agents. What do they do for playwrights? How does a playwright get an agent? Does one need an agent to succeed? Alexis Williams is the Associate Artistic Director of the Playwrights Realm in New York. Previously, she was an agent with Brett Adams Artists Agency, where she represented playwrights, directors, composers, designers, and choreographers. Before joining the Brett Adams team, Alexis worked at McCarter Theater Center, Contemporary Stage Company, and served as literary manager for Detroit's Planet Ant Theater. In her time in the theater, she has worked as a director, a producer, a dramaturg, a teaching artist, and has assumed multiple other roles in the industry. She has appeared on panels for the National New Play Network, the League of Professional Theater Women, the NUEA, and the Musical Theater Factory. She's conducted roundtable discussions with the New School for Drama, Interact's Core Writers Group, and Paragraph New York. In fall of 2017, Alexis was named one of the Interval's Women to Watch. Alexis is on the advisory board of Space on Ryder Farm, is an alumnus of the Lincoln Center Directors Lab, and is a graduate of Northwestern University. Welcome, Alexis.
Hi, thank you. Great to be talking with you both.
So why don't you tell us about your career, how it started, and how you eventually became an agent?
Absolutely. So I went to Northwestern for theater, and my focus there was actually on directing. Finished up school, was kind of doing the freelance directing thing a little bit. Did a wonderful year-long directing, producing fellowship at the McCarter Theater. And at that point was just sort of wondering about the other roads out there in theater. You know, I was freelancing and liking it, but the idea of doing the whole gig to gig, job to job thing in the long run sort of terrified me. So I was just kind of wondering other things out there that, might be a little more, have some more longevity and health insurance and, pay me some money, and ended up sort of oddly kind of falling into agenting. I remember having a wonderful coffee with at the time producing director, Mara Isaacs, just to ask her about like what other fields were out there and inquiring about agenting. And there was somebody who actually had worked at McCarter before who then kind of pivoted and became an agent. She's like, you can call up this guy right now, and I'm sure he'll like buy you a coffee and tell you what the world is. So I did, had a lovely chat. Then, a month later, there was a job opening for an assistant at Brett Adams, which was where he worked. I applied, I got it. And then I spent many, many years there, first as an assistant, then as a junior agent, then as a full-on agent. Yeah. So that's kind of the path that got me to there.
Can you tell us the most basic question, which is, what do agents do for artists?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, the role of an agent is twofold. On the one hand, there's promoting artists and their work, and on the other hand, there's protecting artists and their work. And, the promotion side is the land of, helping send the script around to theaters or opportunities that might be a good match. Maybe if there are collaborators where you think they would hit it off, trying to like forge those connections, really just kind of telling folks that, hi, this is a writer you should know about, or here's a piece you should know about. Here you go. Let's pay attention to it. And the protection side of it is more, when contracts are coming through, or you have interest, or folks are supposed to be getting paid, making sure terms and contracts look okay, making sure that artists are getting paid when they should be getting paid, just making sure they're sort of taken care of on that side of things. Yeah, and I feel like I've also noticed and realized, with more emerging artists, the percentage of what those two sides are they change through time. When you've got somebody who's brand new to the scene, a lot of the gig does promotion side of it, since it's not like there are those contracts that are in to negotiate. But as folks are more out there in the world and getting more notice and whatnot, that obviously shifts as more folks know about them, and they might have contracts more and more that, need to be negotiated, and you just need to make sure to protect the artist in those ways. So, yeah.
Well, with that responsibility, especially with contracts and then also promoting the artist as well, what are some of the biggest challenges that you as an agent had to deal with?
Yeah, I feel like a big challenge, it's twofold. I do feel like there's often kind of a misconception on what agents do, that all of a sudden, you have an agent and they have this magic wand and you don't need to be sending your plays out to anybody anymore, or helping forging connections on your own, because your agent is doing all of that work. And I think that is a big misconception. And, sometimes just managing those expectations, where folks assume well, now I have an agent, so I can just kind of sit back and wait for the phone to ring, or now I have an agent, so clearly Broadway is going to do my show, just managing that, since again, an agent is just a champion and people have many champions in their life. They have old professors, they have colleagues, they have folks at theaters they've worked with. So I feel like that has been a challenge. And yeah, I feel like when folks are further along, and I think this is more of a me thing than an everyone thing, when folks get to be further along in their careers, and there is a lot of interest afoot, particularly from spots in the same region, that's always just a fun, tricky land of how to navigate this well in a way where, not everybody's always going to get what they want, but where you're still kind of maintaining relationships in a way where nobody feels screwed over.
So we understand that you represented more than just playwrights. You also represented directors, composers, designers, and choreographers. That is a lot of disciplines to represent. What is the work of representing so many different types of artists, and how do you balance it and stay connected to what's happening and where for all of those different kinds of artists?
Yeah, it was a lot, and I feel like indeed all of those disciplines have different needs around them. With writers, and particularly emerging writers, I kind of want to say it's easier because you have a script that you can send around to theaters, to opportunities. With directors, particularly emerging directors, it's trickier if they don't have work up. If folks do have work up, it becomes an easier land of spreading the word and telling theaters, oh, go and see this. Oh, check out these reviews. Oh, you should know this artist. Designers, designers are often doing so many things at the same time. So a lot of that was managing, okay, well, you have 5 shows all happening in the span of a month. Let's figure out where you have to be when and play that Jenga with the calendar. Also, hey, what directors don't you know that you maybe should know? Because that is a really great route in for designers. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the answer to how I was balancing it all was not sleeping a lot. But yeah, I think it's just with every person in every discipline, chatting with them and sort of you get a sense of what their needs are as an artist, where they need more support, and just sort of responding accordingly.
Can I ask a follow-up question too about this? It's really about do you have a database that you refer to of places where you're connecting these various artists, or are you having to constantly learn and relearn, the theater field and what people are doing and what's going on? What is that sort of internal work so that you're keeping everybody connected to the new opportunities as they arise?
That is a good question. There wasn't a database, but I mean, I feel like there was a database in the sense of, oh God, I forget the site where this exists, but like there is a place where you can find like a bunch of the theaters nationwide. And also I feel like the more time you spend sort of like working in the industry, you just get more of a sense of the companies that exist nationwide. And when you've got that basis, it's not like in every new year, all of a sudden there are like 50 new companies cropping up. Maybe there are a handful, but you sort of have the sense from before of who already was there and who already generally still is there. And, often it was a lot of phone calls or coffees or whatnot with, lit managers at those companies or associate producers there. And, I would always make sure when I would be chatting with folks to say like, hey, what are you up to? Are you still programming? Are there still sorts of shows you're looking for, sorts of artists you're looking for? I mean, also given enough time, you kind of get, and these conversations, you sort of get a sense of like what theater's aesthetics are. Like a Manhattan Theater Club show is like very different from a Soho Rep show. And I'm not sure that that's knowledge you just sort of gain by having seen those productions, by seeing what is coming, seeing season announcements. So yeah, I mean, I feel like while there isn't like a hardcore database, it just turns into like internal knowledge and continued conversations where you just kind of are getting that sense of like what each theater's mission is or vibe is or aesthetic is or needs are, and being able to approach submissions and whatnot kind of accordingly.
So relationship building is super critical to the work that you do as an agent, it sounds like.
Yes. I would also say that I think relationship building is very important for any artist as well. I would lob that up there and underline it and bold it and put it in italics 8,000 times.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like donor relationships as well. A lot of what you're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I know this is being in the development and fundraising world of, yeah, you do have to build relationships. You just know things about certain foundations and what they're looking for. And like, does my mission match their mission? And even as writing, you have to look at grants and those opportunities. And does my writing fit this grant, or am I about to make my triangle shape fit into this square and just make it work? Yeah, that's a lot to juggle.
I mean, it is a lot to juggle, but it's, I feel like the first year and a half-ish is always the hardest, because that's when you're literally, all that knowledge is getting kind of like input into your brain, but then it's there and it becomes sort of easier as time goes on, because you've got that like initial level of knowledge. And even with my pivot into, now being at the Realm, the institutional theater side of it all as their associate AD, that knowledge still translates over. I feel like I still have a sense of the landscape. So yeah, it's a lot up front, but then I feel like you're not necessarily having to add as many new bits of information each year. It's not like, this with fundraising. It's not like every new year, all of a sudden there are like a bajillion new fundraising opportunities. Like there are probably some, but not a ton.
So I have a big question. Like, this is the question that everyone wants to know, all 2,400 plus members that has ever picked up a pen. As you build a client base, are you looking for clients? Like, are you going out in the world and trying to find clients for yourself, or are they looking for you? How does the agent and, for us, writer relationship begin?
Yeah. And I think this is probably different from like agent to agent. So I don't know. I can see what I'm about to say applying to a few folks. I am keeping my ear to the ground and sort of going out to like look for new clients, which might take the form of keeping an eye on some of like the MFA programs and who's coming out of them, keeping the eye on like the big fellowships and whatnot, or if there were like readings happening around, keeping an eye on organizations. I mean, before I was at the Realm, being like, oh, who are their scratch padders and fellows with y'all? Like, oh, who are the folks, the Jerome folk? You've got Playwrights Foundation in the Bay Area. Who's in those summer programs? So a lot of it is just kind of like keeping an eye around to see who is on the scene, if they have readings and whatnot that I can go to. going to those. If there is a stealthy way to request scripts, doing it that way. I was always a big fan of like the stealth script request, where it's like going through another person. So you're not getting somebody's hopes up if you're truly just like, oh, here's somebody I hadn't heard of. And this play sounds interesting. And I'm curious what it's about. So, it was often that. There were some folks where they would come to me. I feel like generally folks that were like a little further along, or where they're at the land of, hey, I just got this award, or hey, a couple theaters are asking me about this play and I'm starting to like need help figuring out like strategy, or, oh, I've got a contract for this big cruise gig that I'm designing and I've never done one of these before. And, one of your clients is a friend of mine and recommended you, so like there have been some of those that have come through. There definitely have been some of those cold calls. And yeah, and I feel like the ones where I was the most excited, I mean, you always want to be excited about the work. So like that, of course, always comes first. But in the truly cold calls, the ones where I'd be like, okay, I'm actually reading this play sooner rather than later, and not kind of like having an intern do a first pass, would, often be the land of folks where in the cover letter it is like, oh, I was a finalist for this fellowship, and here's a thing that's coming up with the work. Since I don't know, it's the land where it feels like there is something like they were having a bit of a moment, and there would be something to capitalize on in that moment and to help them steer and move forward. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I just kind of rambled a bit.
You did a really great job of explaining how an agent isn't your only champion. You have your professors, you have other theaters that you've worked with, you have your colleagues. Would you tell people that an agent is not going to be your first champion? Or if you're seeking out for other champions, an agent isn't necessarily your first one?
Oh, that's a hard question. I mean, I think the following. I think folks do need to activate their champions. I think they do need to apply to the opportunities that they can apply to themselves. They need to research the theater landscape and like what those opportunities are, and not try to make a triangle fit into a square if it's not going to fit, and send things to places where it seems like it's a good fit. I do think, yes, professors and other theaters are great. So yeah, I don't want to say an agent isn't. I think the land is okay. This is what I would say. Your first champion is yourself. No one is going to take as much ownership of your career as you. Period. Full stop. Like that. I stand by that. I do think that with all of the other champions that I've named, an agent is someone that has an additional financial stake that is tied to yours. So I would hope that they're sending your play out to more people and the correct spots and the correct opportunities, to be clear, but like to more than your professor from 3 years ago was, or that your, the theaters that you're connected with are, or that your colleagues are. Yeah, because I feel like they can still be champions, but it's not like all those folks have other things going on and other gigs and other jobs, which is not to say that they're not still wonderful champions, but I don't think they're necessarily going to be like, cool, we're sending this to like 5 spots this week. So yeah, that's how I would kind of answer that.
You were talking about how you found playwrights as an agent. This fellowship has these playwrights and this other one has these other folks. And I would love to hear if there is sort of a baseline of, I'm putting this in quotes, like success, or that you need to have sort of accomplished or gotten to as a playwright before you would be considered by an agent.
Yeah, I'm going to say a thing that is dangerous and tricky. I think 90% of the time, yes. But I would say I think it also depends on how we're defining success, because there have been a couple folks who were, coming out of programs where honestly, I did not do the first read. It went to like an intern and then another and then another. And then it got to me and I was like, oh, wow, this actually looks like an interesting voice. Like I'll read some more of this. I'll read some more. Okay, huzzah, let's do this. But honestly, I feel like actually the people that I'm referring to already, like they were coming out of an MFA program, like they were in, at that point, they like were getting into, you know, some of those fellowship opportunities. Yeah, I guess I would say yes, but I feel like it depends on how we're defining that.
Yeah, because I think sometimes I hear from different people, there's a confusion about whether or not I've written a really amazing play, and so the play is enough to get me an agent, or I've written a really amazing play and now I'm shopping it around to different theaters, and once I've had it put up, or I don't know, given a stamp of approval by this, that, or the other, then I am able to get an agent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if someone is like very, very new to it all, like super emerging, like hasn't gotten any of these fellowships, isn't in one of those, you know, MFA programs that everybody are sort of like looking to see who's coming out of them. If you've written this very great play, and I feel like that is always subjective. So it's like, what exactly does that mean? I think the first step is to research open submission opportunities and apply to those, because most of those do not require you to have an agent. Or if there are theaters around, you know, where you're like, this aesthetically seems like this might be a good fit, I think you can reach out and submit. And even if there are spots that are like, we won't take it without an agent, you know, you can usually write a note and explain. And sometimes the folks will change their mind. Sometimes they won't. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities for emerging writers that specifically do not require you to have an agent. So I kind of feel like the first route is going that route, because then if it's like, oh, you ended up being a finalist for Ars Nova's play group, oh, this got into the O'Neill, oh, you know, this was what was about to be in like Bay Area Playwrights Festival, then you have those other things that you can refer to when you're reaching out to an agent that's bluntly going to make them more likely to pay attention, and it allows folks to capitalize on things more. So I think the first stop isn't, I've written this great play and I've shown it to no one, and I'm just going to go find an agent who is going to make all my dreams come true. I think the first step is, I've written a play, I think it's great. Let me look at some of the opportunities out there. Like, where could I send it? Where are the development opportunities? What are the reading things? And sending it around to those. Because honestly, nobody's picking you for those because you have an agent. Like, it does not matter. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
When you were an agent, were you ever a reader for competitions?
I was a couple times, yeah.
Were those sneaky ways to find, or incognito ways to find scripts?
Those were sort of incognito ways to find scripts at times. I mean, I feel like I often was doing it just because I wanted to have a sense of like what all was out there. But yeah, that often was a way to get to know more folks. And I wouldn't say that I was reading to do that, but it never hurts. I mean, heck, I'm literally still doing that. I read for y'all, and there'll be folks where I'm like, ooh, I want to make sure they apply to our programs. Fun fact, Hagen Bryce Walker read for one of your things and was like, he will get into the Realm family. So yeah. And the thing that I would also lob up is that, to keep in mind, is that like, in submitting to like the various awards and fellowships and blah, 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 you often have folks from many theaters that are reading for those. So another boon is, even if you don't get the thing, you don't know who all read that might now be a fan of yours. So it's always a useful thing.
I love that. Apply. Apply.
But like, do your research and apply correctly. If someone's like, oh my God, we really love small cast comedies, don't send some crazy 15-person intense drama that's going to make everyone sob. Literary departments are small and folks have a lot to do. So save your time and theirs and just, apply smartly.
So we've been kind of dancing around this question, which is that I've heard playwrights who have agents say that having an agent doesn't decrease their hustle. Like, they have to continue to keep an eye out for places to submit. They have to continue to network. They're still filling out and sending in submissions.
Yep.
How would you respond to that agent-client relationship when you have an agent, and what your work continues to be and how you find that balance?
Yeah. I mean, legit what you just said that playwrights were saying, I'm like, yes, 1,000,000%. Yes, yes, yes. Again, having an agent doesn't mean that the client isn't continuing to hustle. Yeah, I mean, I feel like agents, again, are just additional champions who are also sending your play out. I feel like they become very useful in the land of contracts and negotiations. And there are some things where it's like, hey, these fees are most favored nations, across the board, which will be what it will be. But you can still, it allows you to have a human that you can chat to weigh the pros and cons, to figure out what you can ask for, to have your back on that side of things. And yeah, I mean, and I think that agents, should of course be sending the work around too, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden the writer has stopped doing that. I mean, think about it. The agent gets 10% of what the writer is making, and the writer is getting 90%. So if you think that the agent is doing 100% of all, and of course, like there's the work of like the writing the thing and the XYZ. I am not giving that the short end of the stick at all. But I do think that playwrights do need to continue to forge connections on their end, to maintain the relationships that they have, to send things around. Yeah. And just to be in communication with our agent around it. I feel like when I was agenting, I would keep clients in the loop with opportunities I think they could be great for, and that, we were submitting, or spots we'd send it to. And I'd say like, hey, let me know where you've sent this. Let me know the folks that you already know and are already talking to, just so it kind of becomes like a coordinated effort and everybody's on the same page.
So kind of the opposite question. Sometimes it is just not a good fit between agent and client. It just isn't. But for artists, especially if you're an artist that's like, I've worked so hard to get here and I finally got this agent, when is kind of the time to tap out? Or when it's just not going the way that you thought it was going to be, or it didn't meet your expectations? When is the time to to fully separate? And do you treat it more like a job where you search for one when you have one? Or should you separate and then look for one, or just trust your own hustle?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the agent artist relationship is a relationship like any other. So, I mean, so it's such a personal question, because I feel like it depends on the person, but if it's feeling like the relationship isn't working, if you feel like you can't call them, if you're like, I'm intimidated to like call my agent, that's never a good sign. I mean, I think a big no-no is if you're getting like contracts in and it's taking like an insane amount of time for the agent. And I don't mean like a week or two, sometimes things take a bit. And honestly, the theater end of things, it sometimes can take a bit. But I mean, I've seen, not from me, but from others, the land where it's like, oh, you're about to have rehearsals starting tomorrow and your agent hasn't like finished doing this contract. That's bad. So I feel like those in my mind are like the big no-nos. Yeah, I mean, I think the land of, if they're like, hey, we're sending it to like these spots and it's been ages and it doesn't seem like they've sent it to anybody. I mean, I'm giving the asterisk of if you're like, hi, I think my agent is sending this to like 75 places, that's kind of insane. But if it's like, oh, it's been a while, they were going to send it to like this handful and like nothing has happened, I don't think that's good. And in terms of when it's best or how to part ways, it's like any other relationship. I do think that if there were things that like the writer is not feeling good about, before being like, I'm just going to dump you, you should sit down and talk to your agent about them, reach out, say like, hey, can we talk? I'm feeling these frustrations. Here are some things that I'm not sure where they are. I really want to, like, what's going on? Basically have the first voicing of displeasure and see if, the agent adjusts. Because like, there could be things that they're not aware that you're feeling, So I feel like first do that, give it a little bit. Then if it still feels like, yeah, I tried and this is not working, then I feel like it could be a good time to part ways. Did I answer the full question? I feel like I sort of did.
No, you fully did.
Okay.
Definitely. So many of the playwrights we work with think having an agent will finally make their career. How would you respond to that belief? And what advice do you have for playwrights who don't have agents but think they need one?
Yes. Okay. An agent will not make your career. They do not have magic wands. When I was an agent, I wish I had a magic wand. It could be like, cool, all of a sudden Broadway is happening. Ding. Does not exist, does not happen. Having an agent doesn't mean, oh, well, this place wasn't going to do your show, but now you have an agent, so they're going to. Nope, untrue. Doesn't even necessarily mean people are going to read it faster. So I don't know. I think if you've got like the starts of a career happening, or like a bunch of interest from a bunch of spots, or you're already sending your things around to places and you're getting, great responses and whatnot, and you feel like you need someone to help you navigate that, like, sure, that could be a time to start to look for someone. If it is the land of, I wrote a play, I now need an agent, I would just say, I don't think you do. And again, there are, as I was saying earlier, many opportunities that you can apply to without an agent. Do what you can for yourself. And then that becomes a better time to be able to like reach out to agents because you've got something to show for it. And then when you get one, continue to still hustle and forge those connections. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Course.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to move to submitted questions, Alayna?
Yeah. One question that I think that a lot of people have is, are there specific places that you should look for an agent? Is there an online database that you look for? Do you just Google it? What are the ways that you would if you wanted to approach one?
Yeah. I mean, to my knowledge, there isn't an online database. One could Google it. I kind of wouldn't, though. Actually, no, don't Google it. That's a weird thing to do. I am tempted to just like rattle off places going to, because I will say the following, because I think that many times people think they need agents when they don't need agents. I think the following, advice I always give to folks when they're kind of looking around, because you've got the big, massive, huge ones, you've got the mid-sized ones, you've got the boutique ones. So it sort of depends on what your needs are. And I wouldn't even say like how established you are, like I know some major playwrights who are with like mid-sized agencies because there might be a level of, of personal connection that feels even greater there. A thing that I always tell folks is to talk to their friends who have agents and see who their agents are and ask how their agents are, ask how they are liking their agent. If there are specific things that will be important to you, ask folks like, oh, well, how is so-and-so with communication, getting back? How are they with submitting? How are they with X, Y? Like, think of those things that you can ask specifically just to kind of get a sense of who might be a good fit to try to reach out to. And then if you are reaching out, I think it's always good to reach out via, you can do the cold call, but like if your friend's like, I'm happy to like drop my agent a note, or if there are folks at a theater that we're tight with them and they're like totally happy to reach out to so-and-so on your behalf. I think folks are often more likely to pay attention when, it's like, oh, this person that I know told me this is good, so I'm going to pay attention to this thing that I don't know about is good. I'm probably going to pay attention to it quicker than I would if it's just, if I'm like, I don't know you from Adam. So yeah.
I do think it's like you were saying, is when you are submitting and somebody does pick up your script, or maybe you weren't, like you got to a finalist round and you got to the interview and you got to talk to people. And those opportunities, frequently people are like, well, here's an agency that we have talked to before, and we know these people have these agents. Feel free to send, or we can send on your behalf if you want us to.
Yeah.
So again, it's like you were saying before, is that relationship building, and you don't know who's talking behind closed doors. You don't know who's reading your script.
Yep.
An agent might have seen your script several times. You just don't know.
Yep. Again, back in my agenting days, because I also would want to read multiple plays by someone before agreeing to work with them, just to like have a sense of, we want to rep people for their careers, not just for like a single play. And there were times that I would have stealthily gotten my hands on like so many plays. Like I remember sitting down with Eleanor Burgess and I was like, oh, can you send this? And I'm like, already actually read it. And like 5 other plays. And then she was like, oh, I'm going to tell you about this and that. And, we ended up working with her, but it was hilarious. I think I came clean at a point where I was like, yeah, we'd literally gotten our hands on like 4 of your plays before we even reached out. So yeah.
That's awesome. I feel like you've answered this other submitted question in so many ways as we've gone along, just in terms of sort of debunking the myth that you need an agent to get your play produced anywhere, full stop.
Yep, you don't. Yeah.
This
But I
is
think that
awesome.
if somebody is producing your play, you don't want to talk to, and they're like, here's a contract. You do want to talk to somebody to make sure the terms look okay. It's not like you're signing away your firstborn child.
Right.
For anyone that's a member of the Dramatists Guild, you do have your representation, and it depends on what state you are, what number you call or who you contact. But yeah, there's a lot of resources that you can go to prior to an agent.
Yep. Yeah, I would underline that too. Yeah. I mean, heck, even if you've got like other friends and colleagues and whatnot who have been through it before, often folks will know if something's crazy. So yeah.
This is great. Thank you so much, Alexis. This is such a great conversation.
Of course.
Well, we have one more thing
Love it.
you must do.
Okay.
Every session this way. So pretty much for all of our guests, and then for Hannah and myself, our podcast is named Theater Begins Here. And so based on this conversation, we love to ask guests, where today does theater begin for you? And you can go first, you can go last if you want to see what we say, what we do.
I want to see what you say and do.
Well, I can start. I grabbed a little piece from this conversation with you. Well, I actually thought this was an incredible conversation, but what I would say is theater begins with relationship building.
I wrote that on this Post-it. I just want you to see.
Do you have another one? Because I can do a different one if you want to say that one.
I do have another one because I really liked how Alexis said it. So today for me, theater begins. I don't know why I had to say it dramatically. Today for me, theater begins with being your own champion.
I love it. It's hard. Today for me, theater begins with finding your people.
Yes.
It was relationship building, but folks are like, aesthetically, I love what you're doing and it feels in line with what I'm doing. Let's do some collaboration.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Amazing.
I love it. Are there any last words or things that you wish you'd said for our members before we let you go?
No, just thanks for having me. Oh, I guess to do a quick plug. I mean, I keep mentioning all of the, the submission opportunities that one doesn't have to have an agent for. One of those is coming up. Our open submissions for our writing fellowship and Scratchpad series will be opening up in mid-January. I would say the exact date if I remembered it off the top of my head, but it's mid-January. We just go to the Playwrights Realm website, in the middle of January. I'm sure we'll be up there. So keep an eye out and you can read up more on those programs there. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for having me.
That's awesome. Yes. Thank you for joining us and talking about this very important topic that everybody wants to know about. And I feel like you just testified. In the next episode of Theater Begins Here, we will be interviewing playwright Bess Frankel about invisible success. What are the unseen works or careers as an artist? Does success matter if some people do not see it? We will record this session live from the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival Region 5 in Des Moines, Iowa, where we will be joined by college theater students from across Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota.
Thanks for listening to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.